So in this case, the genetically modified is canola. So mostly these, like the corn and the canola, they're genetically modified so they won't be killed by the herbicide made by Monsanto. Essentially, the consumer version is called Roundup. So that way, they don't have to, organically grown stuff, you have to put workers out there to pull the weeds by hand. Or try to plant crops that are weed resistant. Well, it's mostly pulling the weeds by hand, which is very labor intensive. In this case, what they do is they just genetically modify this corn or canola, then they can spray all the crop with herbicide, which is absorbed by the food. Plus we have this food that has herbicide in it and genetically modified so it resists the herbicide, which I understand sort of creates this sort of unusual man-made bacteria in our gut. It's basically, it's from what my understanding that I read that somewhere. So if you're eating, and almost corn is unavoidable in our diet with the corn syrup. You know, the cows are fed corn. Pretty much almost everything we eat is related to corn in some way. So it's those two things. But what happens is that if this genetically modified crop intermingles with other crops, then you have a weed that could potentially become resistant to the herbicide Monsanto that makes. Then they have to up the ante and come up with an even more intense herbicide. And it's just scary. It's just a big problem. People should really think about it. And then the argument is, this we can increase the crop yield, and and by using oil burning combines and tractors and harvest equipment, and we can increase our yield. And by using pesticides and herbicides, that can increase our yield. Because the world has so many mouths to feed, which is getting back to the other question. If we're going to make these changes, we have to solve this problem of having so many mouths to feed. The planet, even though it's a rock just speeding through space, is a closed system. Do you remember back during the big first ecological movement? Oh, getting back to this thing, some people have said, the scientists were wrong about the first time, they predicted global cooling during the 70s. This was not a consensus, and this was based on an article that was in Newsweek, where one scientist or a small group, very small group, it was certainly not a consensus, proposed, they had a theory that it looked like the environment was cooling. And I think probably what tripped them up was all the aerosols that we'll be putting in the atmosphere. Whereas CO2 and methane are greenhouse gases, aerosols can tend to block out the sun. That's just how, and also water vapor can. Anyways, their findings were quickly rejected. Well, not quickly, but eventually rejected. And it was more blown up in the media than it was in the science community. Okay? So when anybody uses that argument, they were wrong before, science is wrong before too. Greek scientists thought that the brain's function was to cool the blood, that our essence and our thought process was in our chest, in our heart. But they were still right about a lot of things. Pythagoras and Euclid. They came up with a theory of atoms, Those great philosophers in Greece. It's funny, philosophy and science were considered the same discipline a long time ago. So if you were philosophizing on the meaning of life or something, you would still be in the science category. You would still be in the same category as the guy that what was it? I wish I could remember the name of the Greek scientist that came up with the displacement theory. He proved that a crown was not made out of pure gold without having to melt it down and examine it. I want to say it's Pythagoras, but I might be wrong. That doesn't ring true in my brain. So then the other story I came across. All right, I'll try to wrap this up. I know some of you don't want really long fezzes. Engineered frankenfish coming to the nation's tables. This is a type of farmed salmon that is genetically modified that it will, let's see, I remember reading it grows at sometimes at 4 times the normal rate. Where does it say that? What's more, it hopes to avoid pollution. You know, of course, the firm is all for it. They're asking the FDA to approve it, which they haven't yet. Let's see. It says consumers would be reluctant to eat a modified fish, so they'd probably try to avoid having it labeled as such. Anyway, I'm skimming the article here, but I can't see exactly. I know that it grows much, much faster and can get to market faster, which ponders the question, what would happen to people that eat this genetically modified? You know, already we have girls entering puberty at a younger and younger age, and one of the theories is that the hormones in the chicken and beef. So you imagine having a steady diet of salmon. Oh, here it goes. It's in the caption under the picture. Aqua Bounty Technology salmon in background reaches an 8-pound market weight in 18 months instead of 36. That's a rapidly growing fish. What would happen to us if we eat a lot of that? Do you think we'd grow into monsters? We'd just grow huge? If you fed it to your child, would they grow faster? Scary. It's a scary question. Then there was this article. Oh, I wish I had more time for this. Hey, whenever I dip, so it's like sex, religion, and politics. Yeah. There's a theology professor at Loyola Marymount University here in Southern California that wrote that's analyzing Obama's Bible references, and he makes some sort of interesting notes. Is that according to this gentleman, you know, Obama traveled, you know, as a young child because of his parents or whatever situation. And, you know, he's lived in different parts of the world. He was born in Hawaii. And he's been exposed to Islam, but he chose Christianity as his and he felt a real affinity to the Black Protestant church. And so many of his themes are that of which would come out of the Black Protestant church, who, by the way, as much as the evils that religion has done, with your Reverend Martin Luther King and everything, the civil rights movement started in the church. So when the blacks would get together and in the South and start singing about freedom, it started in the churches. And of course, gospel music has had a big influence on American music. So it goes into sort of detail, but it does show. It also says that prior to John F. Kennedy, religion had very, very, very little to do on your electability. But when John Kennedy was the first Catholic, American Catholic president, he was Irish Catholic, obviously, and it became a big issue. Especially this notion that if you're a good Catholic, you owe your allegiance to the Pope first, above all. And which kind of made sort of course, we all knew JFK wasn't a good Catholic, was he? Jimmy Carter was very open about his religion. And I can remember my mother telling my father, vote for Richard Nixon, his mother was a Quaker. I should have put that as one of my lies. Then I once voted Republican. All right, so it's an interesting article. It sort of shows, kind of gives you an idea of what parts of the Bible are important to Obama, and what parts he's just sort of, puts aside. And he's certainly not a zealot, a fundamentalist that takes the Bible literally.